I'm Alex Ragir, co-founder of Storyhunter. This is the Rough Cut. We are, for the first time, doing this in front of a live audience. Woo! Make some noise, Chicago. We're here in downtown Chicago at the Framestore offices. We just watched some of the best short-form videos selected by the Telly Awards. Give it up for the Telly Awards. Yeah. And this is like really, you know, we saw animation, we saw storytelling, we saw agencies producing, we saw media companies, just a complete array of different types of videos. And this is kind of where we are in 2018. And so that's why we're going to be speaking with someone who's kind of a pioneer in this, who's been doing this for over 20 years. And we're going to talk about the evolution of video journalism, video storytelling. Craig Duff is a former CNN, started in 1998 at CNN documentary unit, was one of the first people who did the one-man band, kind of one person going out, shooting and editing for them. Then he was from the original team of the New York Times video journalism unit, and now a Medill Northwestern School of Journalism professor, Craig Duff.
I get my own mic.
This is the Rough Cut. You know, we were supposed to have someone hand it to us. But.
So I'm sad to say that you're making me seem younger than I actually am. You said I started at CNN in 1998. I actually started at 1988.
1988. But you started doing the solo journalism thing.
Yeah, thereabouts in the mid-90s when cameras became capable of actually going out with a small camera, this Sony camera, this VX1000 that shot on small tapes. You could actually go out and shoot some stuff and bring it back and actually broadcast it. So,
yeah. So take us back in time. What was that like? The first, so CNN TV, usually you had, what was the size of the crew that you would typically have?
Often I was a producer and a director and writer, and so I would go out with a crew with a photographer and a sound person and a correspondent, and we would go out and do stories. Sometimes I would have two crews and a correspondent, and so that was the typical way of working. There was one time when I was going to Thailand, and I had a crew that I was working with in Phuket doing a show about tattooing, and there's this crazy festival in Phuket about where they will pierce their cheeks with like giant spears and stuff like that. So we were there doing that, and then I went up into the mountains, and I didn't have the money to take the whole crew up there. And I was also working with this anthropologist who wanted to keep it kind of low key. So it's the first time I actually used my own a small camera and shot on my own, and went and found this ritualistic tattoo guy who made these magical tattoos that would keep people.
So you went alone?
I went with this anthropologist, yeah. So I produced it and shot it myself. And this guy makes these tattoos that will keep bullets from hitting you and from killing you and stuff like that. So I never tested that out, but
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, but so how was that changing from a crew to one just you?
Well, it allowed you a lot more flexibility, and to be kind of just this unobtrusive way, sort of almost a fly on the wall with this guy, just sort of hanging out, in the same sense that we're very accustomed to today with these small cameras. I see a Sony camera over there that's just have something you can hold in your hand and you can do amazing things with it. This is the very beginnings of that back in the mid-90s.
Yeah, and that's sort of like when I first got like kind of passionate about that whole concept being like one person, it's your story. It's almost like this we saw a lot of in the screening. We saw animation. We saw all these ways of telling stories. It was sort of like you can go out, tell your own story. It's almost like it's something, authorship.
Yeah.
To some extent.
Yeah, television has always been much more collaborative, and people would work together to do things, and the producer was really the driver of the piece, as opposed to film, which is more the director driving things. And but this allowed you sort of the total flexibility to be able to do things on your own. It also left all the responsibility up to you too. And it makes it a lot lonelier at dinner that night when you're out doing things.
Yeah, it's lonely being a renegade.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so then, so you were at a TV company that usually has crews, then you started doing one person. Did that last? Was that something that was sustainable?
Well, the first time I did something with CNN where I did a lot more of it on my own, I had bought this camera that came out around 2000, this thing called the Canon XL1, which is a red and white camera that these lenses on it. And I bought it for myself, and I made the investment, which was a lot of money at the time for me. And I produced this show for CNN International, where I went around the world and I was trying to find applications of technology that were working in small ways to help a village or a society sort of improve. And so I was looking at an irrigation canal system that was being used to create electricity in a small village in the Dominican Republic. I was in Bangladesh looking at the Grameen Bank's initial foray into mobile phones. And so I was very nimble doing it on my own. I'm going out and trying to find fixers and working with them and all that. And I shot about,
You think the quality was as good as it?
Well, it wasn't nearly as good as a Betacam, you know. But I like to think that the storytelling quality was just good.
Because now with the distribution, now with like mobile distribution, it's almost becoming that type of intimacy is necessary sort of to capture the attention of the people on the mobile phone, that type of like human intimacy.
Yeah. You know, people are much more forgiving now, I think, they don't really notice how it was produced, as long as it's authentic and it's interesting and engaging to them, and you know, in many ways intimate, I suppose. Folks are willing to forgive that, and but at the time it allowed me actually to go out into the world and do this film, which I couldn't have done otherwise because we wouldn't have the budget to take all those people with me, you know. And also I was in places where, you know, you can get out there and hop in a little van and go out, you know, have to have a big production and all that stuff. So that was exciting.
So then when did you start at the Times? 2000.
The New York Times, we started around 2002. Yeah, we started doing, because they had worked out something with the Discovery Channel. They were going to do a digital channel. It was called Discovery Times Channel. That's imaginative.
And they were going to they were going to produce video.
So they produced a lot of programs, and there was a production company that actually started off as a VJ company that was the New York Times had bought. That had already been doing this program called Trauma Life in the ER, using these kinds of cameras and going in to emergency rooms and doing these programs.
Take me back to the New York Times, a newspaper that had a website, and then how did they start doing video? They started like they tried to get the reporters. Well, tell us about all the
Well, they started off doing television for this channel, and then video, basically broadband became fast enough that you could actually have video on the web. If you look at like early video, the first video we did on the web, I was in 1998 at CNN. We did an interview with Marilyn Manson for this show I produced called The American Edge. And I remember this little postage-sized little video window, and it was on dial-up at the time, right? So like this little, you know, like 30-second clip of Marilyn Manson, like a postage-sized video on the website. So that was sort of the first time we actually did something, streamed a video on the web. But then as it became easier and easier to do that, then places like the New York Times and the Washington Post started having folks do video. So like Travis Fox, who's now at CUNY in New York, was doing amazing stuff at the Washington Post, and the New York Times started doing things. And then along comes YouTube and others along the way.
And what did they do? What were they totally wrong about?
Totally wrong about?
Yeah, like
This is being recorded, right?
This is being recorded. Oh yeah, I guess.
They're my friends. I can't.
Yeah, they're your friends. They probably had like.
Well, I think we made all kinds of mistakes. We don't, you know, when we were trying a lot of things. When I was at Time Magazine, you know, we were trying all kinds of things to try to find an audience and play with the forum. It was all very new. The New York Times, I think that the biggest challenge there was to get a newspaper to think differently about storytelling in a way that you could use to find the power of video and to convince these writers who were who were very, very smart and very accustomed to doing things in print and knew how to do things that way, to get them to think, you know, okay, I'm not just creating a video that's going to sort of play next to your story. We have to think about the reporting at the same time and really start integrating it into the process. And that's still happening.
Sort of people tried to do it, and then it sort of didn't work, and then they hired separate people to do video and. So you were the head of video for Time Magazine for a while. What was that,
2008 to 2012.
Yeah, and that was sort of a moment where the whole concept of like hiring video journalists all over the world was like, you were kind of one of those people. It's so funny. I talked to like the senior producers and like the heads of media companies, and they're always like, I'm showing them how to use Storyhunter, and we search like Chicago, and like you show up, and they're like, "Oh, that guy was my boss."
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like so you were one of the people who were working through this process of collaboration, which is like
Right.
something that before the TV companies, it's all was done by themselves, and then they realized you have to collaborate with independent producers. What was that learning process like?
There were some actually amazing things happening right about the late 2000s there. A lot of folks were out, and they were in different places around the world where news was happening, and they were eager to tell stories, and we were looking for lots of ways to cover the world. So we had these sort of one-man band type journalists, especially in the Middle East and in Asia, and I would work with them individually to do these stories. Well, it's the problem is like algorithms change, habits change. When I was at Time, for instance, they said no more than 2 minutes. People won't watch more than 2 minutes of video, and sort of now habits have changed over the years, and now actually you do see a lot more long-form stuff happening on all the channels. And I was just
and Vice came out.
Vice came out
and started doing the 20-minute documentary.
Yeah.
You're from my alma mater, and in 2005, when I was there was no video journalism. There was no documentary.
Right.
It was just news, magazine, and broadcast.
Right.
And I didn't want to be like a broadcast reporter, so I did newspaper. So now, there's offering. You can learn video journalism and video
can you
storytelling.
learn video journalism at Medill? Is that so? I teach at Northwestern University at the Medill School of Journalism, and yeah, we have I came there 6.5 years ago. This is my 7th year now, and there were colleagues there doing video and as you said, broadcast type stuff, and we do any number of types of video. Right now I'm teaching a social media video class on the undergrads side. And we just started our first specialization in video, where we have 15 students right now who started from day one in our master's program focused on video. And some of them want to be on-air reporters, some of them want to work for Vice, some of them want to work for BuzzFeed, and one wants to be Jimmy Kimmel's producer, apparently. So there's a lot of different types of folks in there and different flavors, and we're just trying to create a really kind of cool sandbox where we can all play around, and by the end of it, after four quarters and spending time with my colleague Brent Huffman doing documentary work, they'll go out into the world and be the next sort of wave of video leaders in the world.
Yeah, so what is, before there was not very many options where you could get a job. Like when I was graduating, there was not very many places. So now you see that there's a lot more options, there's a lot more ways to build a career doing this?
You're asking me? Yeah, of course.
I'm asking you.
Yes, of course. So yeah, back even in my day, like there was television, and CNN had just started. It was maybe 8 or 10 years old, or just actually when I was leaving college, it was only about 6 years old at that point. And so there really weren't that many options for television. It was all basically TV. There was no other video options. Now, I just have one slide I put together the other day of all the folks that are actually doing video out there in the news world. And it's everybody, basically. Every newspaper, every magazine, every news outlet. There's digital native outlets out there doing things, and they're all hungry to create good content. The challenge is, and the challenge has always been this, to do it well, even if you're doing it by yourself, it takes time and money, and that the money that comes in from the advertising that pays for the videos themselves is not enough to cover the actual cost of making the pieces. So no one's getting rich yet.
So what we see, but there
are lots of jobs out there.
What we've seen at Storyhunter is most independent producers might do the stories of their passion projects, the stuff that they really love, and then they do commercial work on the side. So they're all basically building a business where sort of like they're almost building their own little advertising business, but in a different way, producing it. So they're like augmenting what they're working on, like a documentary or a longer form piece or video journalism, and then they're also doing shoots for brands or agencies.
Right, so a lot of your independent producers who are using your platform are sort of bridging that.
Yeah.
What we found in photojournalism and in video journalism is a lot of folks do work for NGOs. Like if they're out in the field, work for an NGO, then they'll do some other pieces on the side for news organizations. Because just doing editorial work as a freelancer can be pretty challenging. Doing it only that, it's hard to get enough work
And as a journalism professor, what do you think about that? People working for the advertisers and working for the news outlets.
Well, it's challenging. I mean, I think that working for NGOs is slightly different than working for advertisers. As long as you're not, I think as long as you're honest with everybody and you tell your editors that you're working with at the newspaper or whatever and say, I'm doing this thing, they're going to pay the bills, and I'll do this piece for you while I'm still there, but you're not doing the same story. And you're not sort of mixing and matching. You know, Errol Morris is an amazing filmmaker.
Yeah.
Does a lot of advertising work.
Yeah.
You know, he's and that's the way he pays the bills, and he makes these great films.
And documentary,
yeah.
Besides the video journalism side, documentary is a big entertainment medium nowadays.
It's
you know,
become that, yeah.
It's bigger than ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's due in large part to the fact that now we have streaming out there. That things like Netflix. And Jason Spingarn-Koff, who used to do pieces for us at Time, actually, as a video journalist, and then went on to the New York Times and created OpDocs, and then is now at Netflix, and he's commissioning lots of amazing work that's happening there in the documentary world. So yeah, it's there used to be just a handful of players. It used to be expensive to make documentaries because you had to use 16mm film, and then for broadcast you had to use broadcast cameras. These days it's much easier. The cost of entry is much easier, and the types of stories you can tell is just sort of endless.
So, looking back, what do you think? What was like something? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What was something that you thought was like you thought was going to happen and didn't happen, or what was like the surprises along the way?
Well, I thought that we would have figured out the business model by now, much better, in the digital video realm. And that's still sort of being worked out. Last year you may have heard about this whole idea of pivoting to video, where everyone was going to pivot to video, and they fired all their writers and they were going to do video because somebody decided that you could put ads in front of that and make money, and they forgot to ask the audience if that's what they wanted, and then it kind of collapsed. So you see these sort of trends happening, and you're like, ooh, do you really want to do that? And people are still throwing things against the wall to see what sticks. And I kind of thought we would have had that figured out by now, but that's not the case.
Well, you do see sort of, even the text on screen videos are almost like taking the first paragraph of a newspaper and cutting them up and adding visual elements. So it's almost like reading the headline in the first paragraph of a newspaper article, but in a visual form. Yeah,
but I think I actually, folks like NowThis and AJ Plus have figured out a way to do them that are very engaging, and actually it is the who, what, where, when, and how of the story, but it actually is engaging, and they are thinking about how the text plays out on the screen with the other visuals in a way that keeps things moving. Now, what happened, though, with those shorter videos is that you saw so much of that because the Facebook algorithm for a while was preferring shorter videos, and they were preferring things that you uploaded into Facebook. So they were trying to take on YouTube, and they still are. And then they tweaked the algorithm and said, okay, well, we're not going to like these short ones anymore. First off, you can't put too many of them up. So now this says, okay, we won't put up too many, but we'll create a bunch of channels that have a bunch of videos on them, and then we'll spread out the stuff we're doing, and we'll keep getting those views. And then that sort of got tweaked, and now Facebook is doing something called Facebook Watch, which is their commissioning work to go on there. So every time the algorithm gets tweaked, everyone freaks out, and actually this year they tweaked it enough that some people have just dropped off completely and have gone out of business.
Yeah, a few places, yeah. And what do you see? What do you see for the future? What do you see? What do you tell your students? You tell them this is a good time or a bad time to do.
How's it going out there, by the way? There's a couple students in the audience. Well, it's a great. Actually, I think there's great opportunities out there right out of school. There's a lot of energy out there happening with young folks and in video and getting out there. I'm looking at sort of what happens with this group that's out there right now and kind of what they do next and kind of what careers can be built so that we have a more sustainable industry. Right now, our students are getting lots of good. They're getting in good places. They're doing good work, and it's exciting to watch. I'm curious to see 5 years from now how they move up and what kind of careers happen. Right now, everyone's just producing stuff, and it's all on this sort of horizontal plane. No one's sort of moving up the ladder kind of thing.
Maybe. Well, yeah. I mean, there's a boom in video, right? This
Yeah.
is more people are watching video than ever.
Mm-hmm.
There's also maybe a boom in the branded content side. So, what do you say to, as journalism professor? What do you say to people who say, I'm going to produce great documentaries, but they're going to be sponsored by Patagonia. They're going to be sponsored by a brand.
Well, I'm not a purist in the sense that I think you can't ever do that. I think actually as a professor and as a teacher, I think the kinds of things that we teach, getting the facts right, being smart, like telling a good story, thinking visually, all these things, finding the characters, finding the empathy in a story, all those things actually apply to any number of jobs out there. It's not like everyone has to go out and be a journalist when they leave our school. There's people out there doing great work, and it's not for news organizations. So storytelling is just so rich and can be applied across the board. And as long as if Patagonia is sponsoring something, as long as no one's saying that that it is necessarily news, or if it's like if CNN runs something, they have to be slightly more transparent than if Bravo runs something, right? So you could have product placement in sort of content on Bravo, whereas in CNN you have to be a little bit more. Yeah. You have to really adhere to more of the standards there, and it's different standards for different organizations. So.
All right. Any kind of last words to, or maybe to the independent filmmakers out there, the people doing all the work? I know that you've actually been
doing all the work. That's good.
Doing all the work.
Someone's doing the work. That's awesome.
Yeah, on Storyhunter.
I don't have to anymore.
Contributing, to all these outlets, and I know that you've done it too. You've done a few jobs. This is like to kind of keep you. Yeah, he's got 5 stars. Yeah. Yeah, the guy from Crain's told me that you walked in and you got the job to shoot over there, and like one of your students was an intern there. They were like, "What are you doing over here?"
Oh, actually, yeah, they were working there. They were a reporter. They've been there for a couple of years. Yeah.
So what do you think? What would you say to the people out there trying to stay independent and produce documentaries and do video journalism?
Everyone who does that does it because they love it, and because they can't think of anything else that would make them happier than to do that. And the money will follow you if you'll find a way to make a living. It's not always easy, but places like Storyhunter allow you an outlet basically to find the work in ways that you couldn't before. So yeah, I'm very bullish on storytelling today and on the possibilities of video, and it's only going to keep changing and keep growing. And now we're all watching it on our mobile devices. It's changing the way we think about the world. So it's awesome. I will say that the most watched video I've ever produced was about how to carve a turkey on the New York Times, and it was 2007. I was actually training some photographers how to do video, and they'd given them these unfortunate little video cameras that looked like guns, and so these photojournalists were going to go out there and with these things that looked like guns and shoot video. So I was training them, and then and then this opportunity came out with the cooking section of the paper to watch this guy from Fairway, the butcher from Fairway, carve a turkey in a way that would get the most meat out of the whole bird. And so I did this thing with those guys, and we put it together, and Brian Williams mentioned it on NBC News that night, and it went crazy. So the most viewed thing I've ever done was a turkey.
Yeah.
So
learn how to carve a turkey.
Yeah.
All right.
They've since redone it. It's the same process, but it's different cameras. So
they've done it a bunch of times.
Yeah.
All the little verticals have done it.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Applause. Who knew I would get applause tonight?